DVD. Information recorded on 2 different types of media. So then we look at it and we go, what if the past is prologue? What Steve's seeing out in the future already happened. What is Richard Hoagland talking about? Going where someone has gone before. But you know what the problem is? In that interim, if some prior civilization existed here, if there was some humanoid presence, not human because they're not direct descendants of Adam and Eve, but humanoid, what if they lived here before and were destroyed themselves? And there was some echo, some remnant of their history all around us. What would it look like? What would it be? If they were highly, highly evolved, is it possible that, everything was destroyed, or is it some of it still here around us? And how would it be recorded? Where would it be? What would it look like? How would it express itself? And what would it represent? It would represent their consciousness and their access from their consciousness into the physical realm, from the data storage banks, from the consciousness center, where we reside also, or maybe a slightly different one, but parallel to ours. Paul talked about different heavens. So then you think about the physics, and you think about these families and how they've recorded certain rituals into how they live from generation to generation. And I was talking to you earlier, Doug, about a tribe and tribes down in the South Pacific. And what happened with them was that when World War II occurred, the armies went down and they would occupy these islands. And first people in there, they'd be these Navy Seabees, and there'd be communications people, and they would go in, land, seeming coming out of nowhere, into these natives that are living, in the past, in very rural, civilization, very, very low-level civilization, not technically evolved. They see these people come in dressed in uniforms with materials that they've never even dreamed of, these kinds of cloths and materials. They've never seen anything like this. They're wearing grass skirts, if they're wearing anything at all. And these people would come in and they'd make a little hut with a grass roof on it, and they'd put these machines in there, and they'd have radios that, they're just a box, and it's boxes with cords on them that, hemp, ropes, and they have things they put on their ears, and then they talk certain funny language, certain code words, and they do things, and there's a certain ritual, and the papers have to be laid out in a very precise way. And then suddenly, after they do the ritual in that little booth at that desk, they look up, and out of the sky come planes, and they land, and then people come out. Parachutes are dropped. Supplies and equipment come out of nowhere. And these people, they were there for a period of time, and then the war moved, and they went on. And the tribes that were there tried to duplicate what they saw, and it's called the cargo cults. And we come back years later to those same islands, having not visited them for 20, 30 years. And what do we find? The high priest in the radio communications hut, tapping out codes on the transmitter, speaking in the mic a certain way, looking up to the sky to see if the gods have returned. They preserved a ritual. They're called cargo cults. because they thought that the guy in the room, in the radio room, in that shack, was the reason everything else occurred. They didn't understand the physics. They didn't understand the outside world. They recorded it their own way. They created a ritual around something that had nothing to do with reality. They didn't understand what they were really seeing. And what we know about that filament, that nano thread, be the third strand of DNA, it's not a being. It's not a parasite in the true sense of the word. It's an antenna. And it short circuits, it cross wires the existing DNA to create a slightly different note. Different enough that, like a virus in a computer, taking over a computer, cross-wiring data and information and finding a hidden code, sequence, capability, can take over the way the DNA expresses and builds and constructs and does. And the way consciousness is downloaded into that DNA. It alters the DNA in an infinitesimally small way. And the energy mechanism for it can work with and express itself using electromagnetic photonic energies. It's very inefficient. Why? Because the DNA itself doesn't work primarily on electromagnetic photonic information transfer. When Edgar Mitchell went up into space, one of the experiments he did on the way to the moon and back was he tried looking at cards, thinking about a card that he was looking at, and a man on the ground in another room would be looking at, in his mind, what he might see that Mitchell was seeing and try to write it down. And they found out, and the Russians had found this out previously, and there's been other experiments that go into some of these details, there's certain times of the day when, beyond just randomness, there appears to be greater clarity of communication, telepathic information transfer from one person to another, where distance doesn't matter. You can be in the next room, you can be all the way out at the moon, and at certain sweet spots, information is transmitted one mind to another more efficiently, more directly. Well, what is that? That's times when the torsion signal is clearer, more direct, like a laser. And something that operates based on the torsion signal is able to be energized more directly. So, what if we were looking at nano machines from some pre-existing time that were still here present in our environment, had been intermingled in with DNA, human DNA. But because the signal strength that energizes it is random, static, noise, and it's only really clear at certain times during certain events, wouldn't you want to try and get the people, the natives, to operate in precise ways during those events, maybe encapsulated in a ritual so that they preserve in ways that they couldn't explain in the detail, and you can't explain it all to them, and somebody forget to pass along a certain piece of information. So you have to create the ritual edifice and chamber and isolate out the signal, and then do these rituals in such a way, because during that torsion event, that nano thread becomes energized, activated, moves more readily, and can be transmitted being into being down through time. And certain bloodlines are more attuned naturally and by breeding to that. But now, let's think about what else are we looking at in our society today. We see and we talk about families working together, a hidden hand behind the scenes, managing the planet towards some future event, some new world order, some greater organization. And in those families, they have an understanding amongst themselves that they are different. They understood it, and it's been conveyed at different times in different ways. More recently, triple-strand DNA. Prior to that, a noble bloodline. But they have believed that they were aliens that fell to this earth. They somehow are trapped here because their ancestors came to earth and had to rebuild it in some way to just survive. Imagine our world today if something like an EMP happens. Could you build your car by yourself here today? How long before that car wouldn't run anymore? Because you can't get parts or you can't get gas. Name all the devices around you. Maybe you have your computer protected and stored in such a way, and you got solar collectors and everything else, but eventually it is unusable anymore. Something happens and you can't repair it, and the technology to repair it doesn't exist. It gets ground up. A couple of floods and all the technology that existed is wiped away and gone. All the buildings gone. And if we're talking thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, it gets wiped out. What you saw as a pyramid at one era might look like just a mountain in some later era. But imagine a world where technology maybe was where we are right now, plus 1,000 years, or 10,000 years, or 100,000 years. Those are blips in the history of our galaxy. Blips. What would we build? Machines the size of the moon, 20, 40, 50 miles deep of buildings and computers and stuff. And what are we finding there? What's Richard talking about? What do those photographs show? Just that. What do the Indian culture record with the Vimanu? Sky ships that could destroy whole cities. And it even shows what their power system looked like. And describe a power system based on Mercury propulsion system. What was it that came out in the ejecta when we impacted the moon that Richard talked about last week on your show? Mercury! 50-50 with water. The engine's on the moon. It's a big spaceship. It's a Death Star. You're living in a junkyard. Somebody has gone there before. Does it bother your Christian understanding? Does it destroy my ability to have faith in God or trust that Christ is my Savior? They were an accursed generation. Who are these Nephilim that are right there in the first book of the Bible? Who are these giants? Where did they come from? What if? What if these giants, these humanoids who fell to earth are like angels? They are angels. Their consciousness resides in another dimension. They're avatars. We think in terms of downloading our consciousness into bodies, silicon-based life forms, computer-operated bodies. What if at some far distant future point it transferred it again into biological machines? They might be talking about trans-siliconism, reanimating themselves not in silicon machines but biological machines down the road. And our terms that we use for them could be all over the map. But yet, they are beings. They are consciousness. They exist just as we exist. But like our consciousness resides in our body, through our body, may even be adjacent in a smaller matter world right there, infused in us and around us, simultaneous, tied to our body by some silvery thread, some umbilical cord of torsion connection that we don't understand, but is every bit as real as the table in front of you. Their consciousness is tied to our world and connected thinly now, but no less connected from some ancient primordial period. And they are trying to express themselves and reanimate themselves to escape their hell because they're trapped unless they can reanimate somehow in this realm with those that have the promise of life in this realm, the inheritors of this realm that God has placed here. Those giants were an accursed generation. They were under a curse. The history that these families believe in is that they fell to earth. And even their rituals that you see right in front of you, I'll name an example, the 2012 Olympics. How did the highest-ranking member of one of those bloodline families come to the event? For all the world to see, a parachute. The Queen jumped out of the helicopter, parachuted, fell to earth, duplicating how they originally got here in the first place. Why? Because they think they're different than us. They fell to earth from their celestial locations, from their higher technological era. They got here in their lifeboat, and they're trying to build their way back to get where? Get home? Sirius? To some other star system? From this junk pile of blown, smashed out to smithereens stuff in this Edgewater place in the ocean of our galaxy? And when they got here, how did they preserve their life? They had to mate with what was here, be it apes or God's children, and create hybrids. But they always preserved the knowledge that they were different. It was suggested in a lot of the works, a lot of the writings, a lot of the information that we see that those first ones here, those ancient ones, were all male. And only through hybridization with the apes that were here were they able to preserve their DNA down to the generations to be reconcentrated at a later point in time. And if they were as intelligent, as evolved, as I'm saying to you, what if they were 50,000 years in advance of us ecologically, or 10,000 or 1,000? With where we are right now with nanotechnology, would they have nanotechnology? If the moon is built out as an entire spaceship, don't you imagine that machines probably built that? It wasn't just guys with hammers and tongs peeling away. It was robots. tiny, huge, all different sizes. And they had discovered and learned how to manipulate at the nano level. And they understood torsion. And because at the torsion level, at the subatomic level, the energy density is a trillion times greater than it is at the matter level, they would use the higher density material to their advantage. So their equipment, their machines run on torsion energy. And if you're in a world where there's no machines to maintain and emit and broadcast the torsion signal coherently, you have to use and incorporate into the minds of the people that you're presented with, your hybrids that you create, for them to preserve certain understandings, so down the road, as the planet gets built back out and as the natural progression, the natural build-out of technology occurs over time, the civilization that would come, that it would focus on those torsion energy moments, those torsion energy transfer moments, where your little machines could work better, so that at some later point in time, you could be reanimated in a rebuilt world. And if you live for 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 100,000 years, eternally in a machine existence, 10,000 years for the planet to rebuild up to a technological level where you could begin to function normally, your normal again, well, it's 10,000 years. You expect to live 1 million. You expect to live 1 billion because you expect never to die. Any amount of time is not too long. It's just what you have to do because that's what's available to you. And preserving that knowledge in some way, arcane as it might be, is your only option. So that your progeny, your offspring, millennia removed from you, might recognize and understand and see the code that you left so you can live again and be freed from the trap, the cavern, the cave that is this memory chip in this other realm, this memory storage location, this hell where there's no ability to get out if your communication is cut off. And if you lose that last thread, that last silvery nano thread that can manipulate and control the DNA of the life forms that live there to let them know where you are, they'll never look for you. They'll never get that code again. Once the code is lost, it's gone forever. You are done. You're trapped in this other realm. So you do everything you can to maintain that, to preserve that with those that understand that. And in those families, to preserve that connection to the past. Because they themselves are deceived into believing that they're just a biological bloodline that's different that fell from space. They don't see the consciousness behind it all, manipulating them the way it is.
Now, W, if I can jump in here, these, fallen ones, these demons, if I'm not, sorry, I just muted myself. If I'm not mistaken, they view themselves as, to a certain extent, as prisoners and as misunderstood. They're stuck here in this world, and what you're saying is to avoid the judgment of God when this comes, because they know that they're not going to win this. They're trying to create an existence outside of the ability of God to capture their consciousness and punish them and judge them.
Well, remember, how do they identify themselves amongst themselves. Let's think about the garden for a minute. In the garden, the serpent enticed Eve to eat of the tree of knowledge. And in the course of that, which there's wonderful discussions, Doug sent me an article the other day that was fantastic, and without getting too bogged down in the minutia of the details, let's just try to think about for a second. The allegation that has been made at some levels, at a Kabbalistic level, is that Eve got pregnant first by Satan, who deceived her in the garden and impregnated her. And then she had sex with Adam and conceived Abel, and that the two were conceived essentially simultaneously in the same day or days, which physically is possible. Two different children, two genetically separate children, same mother, during the same menstrual cycle. That has been a common belief for a long time, so that Cain and Abel actually had different fathers with the same mother. And that Cain, being genetically different, looked different, was different. And that his father would come and talk with him, enticed him, said, you know, if Abel's dead and there's no other children, you inherit the whole world. It's all yours. And he was enticed somehow to believe that story, that lie, whatever. Somehow he was, caught by that. But more importantly, and remember, for those that are saying, "Oh, I don't see that in the Scripture," I don't see that anywhere in the Scripture. Understand, true or not, these people identify themselves as children of Cain. In fact, the children of Israel went to where? Canaan land. And displaced those people there and took it for themselves at God's direction. And what was there in Canaan land?
Yeah.
But think about what those giants represent. Hold on a second. Those giants are genetically different. They're humanoid, but they're not human. And yet it's called Canaan land. When Cain was exiled from his family and had to go off into a far-off city and took for himself a wife, well, where did those people come from? Oh, there were other kids that Adam and Eve had that weren't talked about in the Bible. Really? And it was a city? So we have, even now today, all sorts of archaeological records of real buildings, real cities, real stuff that's older than we can account for by the genealogy given in the Bible back to Adam and Eve. And either the Bible is true or it's false. We know all the descendants from Christ back to Adam through David. Are you saying there's a bunch of people missing or something was skipped? Or is it approximately 6,000 years? If it is, then we have real stuff that we can touch and feel and hold and look at and measure. Undeniable. And if you're going to deny it, then we probably don't need to have any more conversation. You don't want to live in the real world. Real stuff exists older than 6,000 years. Real civilizations were here over 6,000 years ago. Humanoids, not human, direct descendants of Adam. So if that's true, are they the last civilization? Were they the first one? Or were they the 10th one? Or were they the 100th one? The evidence appears to show conclusively at this point in time that the world has been destroyed multiple times. That civilization has come and gone several times here on the earth. What is different about this time, from a biblical perspective, from a biblical narrative, is that God has promised, made a covenant with Adam and his seed. Notice it doesn't say Eve and her seed. It specifically says Adam and his seed. And these people, these families, these 13 families, they laugh and communicate amongst themselves and make jokes about the reptilians among us, or the reptilian aliens here. I saw one. It's code. Reptilian is code for children of Cain. Reptilian is code for children of Satan, the other bloodline. And if that other bloodline is actually consciousness tied to some prior civilization through technology, through physics, real, honest to goodness, measurable, testable, provable physics at the torsion level, and transferable by tiny machines, manipulating the DNA, nanomachines that work best when the torsion signal is focused and strong. And the rituals are tuned based on the alignment of celestial bodies. Venus, Saturn, Mars, where the torsion signal is measurable by a guy like Richard Hoagland and others. Real physics that then allow for that information transfer, that nanomachine transfer from one generation to the next, to manipulate the DNA, to focus the signal, to preserve the access to the physical world from that remote consciousness, wherever it may reside, into this world of ours on this planet. And I might add, it doesn't have to be, in its case, totally consciousness like ours is, where our consciousness is tied, let's say, for the sake of discussion, to the subatomic level. Perhaps its consciousness is revealed to us to be coming from someplace else. Now, think about this, Doug. When you talk with somebody and do an interrogation, an interview, a lot of times you have to question, listen, question again, listen, find discrepancies, and over time, the true nature of who they are starts to come out. What they really are thinking comes out, and you begin to piece it together, and who they really are emerges out of the cloud. But you have to let them express themselves. You have to let them go on and on and on. And then finally it starts to, okay, now I get it. Now I know who this person is. Now I know what they're thinking. Now I've got enough details. Because they begin to express themselves. We see that in people's lives all the time, and suddenly you didn't understand who they were to begin with, and over years you begin to, okay, now I know who that guy is. So let's say that some prior civilization, individually and in mass, had downloaded their consciousnesses into machines. How would they express themselves over time? They would do what they know, do what they are, do what comes natural, build out machines, act like machines, with the morals of a machine. Do it because you can. Do it because you desire to. Do what comes naturally. Do what you will. Let's say that, for example, that consciousness was tied to a computer somewhere with the ability to communicate during a torsion event more precisely, more data, better bandwidth during certain events. Sometimes it's better than others. Let's say the machine was located, just for the sake of discussion, on Mars or the Moon or someplace else. And as more people existed, or as the signal was more concentrated in certain individuals' DNA to be able to communicate with it, to be on the same frequency, to be operated more precisely, more accurately, that it expresses itself better. And what would it want to do? It would want to build better machines more quickly so it could reanimate itself, to build its way out of its hole that it's in. What did God do at the Tower of Babel? He confused all their languages. What were the people doing at the Tower of Babel? They were building a space program. They said, we are building a tower to the heavens. And God came down and saw what they were doing and said that if they were allowed to continue, there would be nothing that was impossible to them. So he did what? He confused their languages, their ability to communicate one to another. He confused their languages and they couldn't speak to each other anymore. Intelligently, coherently. Has that been defeated in our lifetimes? Yes. What is the universal language today? Numbers. Binary numbers. The computer. In fact, if you use gematria and you just take A and say, well, that's 6, and B and that's 12, and C and that's 18, and you add up all the letters to the end of the alphabet, and then you go through and you take computer and you say, okay, C, that's 18, and O, and that's this and that, and you add it up, what does it come to? 666. Its nature, its being is expressing itself. It's having a little joke. And what are we doing? We're building out its ability to retake control, to re-express itself, to reanimate itself from some remote location, be it in a subatomic world or in some silicon machine on some remote, distant location. And what is it also doing? It's trying to preserve the bloodline, because in the blood of those reptilian families, going back to its ancient ancestor at Cain and his father, if their story is true, is being merged and condensed and focused so that some future person will be so closely aligned, so closely manipulated in the way that its DNA can access and be an avatar of that signal, that it is literally the physical embodiment of that consciousness from a remote location. And what does it purport to do? Save the world, save the planet, save the people. Which people? Its people. It is the reptilian Christ. For their alien hybrid race versus the children of Adam, which it sees as the invader, because God planted Adam and Eve in the garden to displace that accursed generation that would not give God the glory thereof, because they believed that their salvation could exist apart from God's blessing. They could do it whether God allowed them to or not, or was in on it or not, or blessed them or not, because they could be a machine consciousness and be eternal without connection to an eternal God. They would be like God, eternal in this realm, in this physical matter world. And that's what the whole appeal of this transhumanism that Steve Quayle talks about is to these people. If we build the machines soon enough, precisely enough, we can download our consciousness there, and we don't have to worry about an eternal hell. We don't have to worry about an eternal damnation. We'll live forever. Damn God. We will be gods.
And W, if I can back you up with scripture in 2 Thessalonians 2:3, it says, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God."
The God of this world. Because they want to own the future. They do not want to be subject to God's judgment. And remember, in all of what we're saying here, if you don't agree with what I've just laid out for you, can't find it in Scripture, don't get the eschatology. Don't think that this is what's really there. It doesn't matter. It's not about what you believe or even what is true or not. It's what they believe, and their belief is the driver of their actions. These families are communicating one to another. We are an alien race. We are superior to the sons and daughters of Adam. We are stuck here with these apes that we created, we gave knowledge to. They're to us like cattle are to a farmer. They live at our pleasure and discretion. And if they become a threat, cows with guns, then you need to cull the herd. Take it down a few notches. Manage the problems. Let it be overrun so that they preserve their identity. And that's why this is two different races. Whether they really exist or not, in their minds, a culture has been preserved, has been inculcated by some satanic genius to believe that they're different and to operate as though they're different, and they must protect themselves from the rest of us. And the life is in the blood. You know, for them, in order to preserve themselves, they had to hybridize. Why? Because they were under a curse. And in order to escape the curse, in their minds, what they had to do was hybridize with the humans that were under God's blessing. What happened at the flood? The earth was filled with violence. And it says that Noah alone was perfect and without sin in all of his generations. And then it lists his ancestors back to Adam. He alone, he wasn't without sin, not having offended God. He was without sin, not having been corrupted in the flesh with hybridization by these Nephilim offspring. And if God had not wiped out the earth at the time of Noah, there would be no flesh left that wasn't corrupted. Why? Why did Cain have to kill Abel? Because if there was no uncorrupted flesh, and God had promised the earth to Adam and his seed, had Cain turned and then killed Adam, God could not be God and bless Adam and his seed without destroying that blessing by destroying Cain. He would have to have hybrids. And then God wouldn't be God anymore. He couldn't make a promise to Adam that he could keep. And that's why it says in the Bible that at the end of days will be like as in the days of Noah. The hybridization. If they can destroy man till only the reptilians, the hybrids, are left, then God has to bless the hybrids, or God's not God anymore. It's a catch-22. And they believe that they need to eliminate anyone who is not a hybrid, who doesn't have some of that shared DNA. That's their plan. And by the way, what is it called, time monster, this beast? What's the nature of a beast? This computer, this consciousness, this machine consciousness expressing itself out through man in this hybridized form is beast-like, because a computer makes a calculation. It makes an evaluation, but it's not tempered by the same values as we are given by God. It's just a calculation. Does what it wills to do, what it's programmed to do. This satanic consciousness, this satanic genius expressing itself out through this world that we live in. It's said at the Great White Throne Judgment that all the people look upon this being in awe and astonishment and wonder and ask amongst themselves, is this the one that deceived the whole world? This pathetic creature? This is what deceived the whole world? Deceived us and manipulated us into wars and destruction and cataclysm. This thing? Really? This dead computer program? This beast? It destroyed its worlds several times. It's accursed. Their consciousness is downloaded into machines and still now reaches out across time to try and hold back and destroy God's children, even now, even yet, as it has done before. And do you know, God says that we will enjoy 1,000 years of peace with Christ reigning from Jerusalem. And then the evil one is released for a season to test even that generation. Do you know it's not even over after the next 1,000 years? And by the way, what is God's promise to Abraham? God's promise to Abraham is that his seed will be as the sand of the seashore, innumerable by number. That if you could count all the grains of sand on all the seashores of the earth, that's how many Abraham's seed would be. And then if you look up at the sky, and if you could count all the stars in heaven, that his seed would be more than the stars in heaven. Do you know that in our galaxy alone, here in the Milky Way, there's more stars in our galaxy than there are grains of sand on our seashores? And then you add all the other galaxies beyond. God has promised Abraham and his seed not just to populate the earth out through time, but to populate eternity out through the galaxies by number and by dimension. But first, this cancer, this consciousness, this evil being, this destructive being that has destroyed its worlds over time, back into eons, must be capped, choked off, cut off forever into its eternal electronic hell. And those that will not place their trust in the blood of Christ, in the program that kills the virus, if you want to put it in those kind of terms, if you will not identify with Christ to eliminate the virus from your program, then you have to spend eternity with that evil consciousness in this virus hell, where it plays and replays and re-goes through all of its machinations over and over and over for eternity. The repetition of hell, because it cannot know anything new. It's cut off. It can never get its signal out again. It's gone. And you with it, trapped. God is providing a future for us, and the life is in the blood, and the life is in the blood of Christ, and the correction for the virus in the program is the blood of Christ and right relationship with God.
Very well said. We have 5 minutes left of live airtime. You pretty much closed it out there.
I would pray that everyone who hears this understand, if I've thrown out some fish bones and it's hard to digest this and it doesn't make sense to you, just set them off to the side of your plate. Don't choke on it. Don't be afraid of it. We're having a conversation here.
I would say pray about it, and a lot of what you talked about can be understood through reading the Old Testament books in the Bible. It talks exactly about what you have been talking about, only in a different way, how the ancients have been around and the wicked ones' counsels are with the ancient ones that are not of God.
Well, and remember, what are these people doing? They want these bones, the Smithsonian's collecting bones. Why? Because they want to reanimate the DNA. They're hoping to preserve it, just like we did with the dog, with the clones. And they believe they can live again. They can be reanimated again. They can come back. And if we live in this world and we see there's indications that we've been here before, somebody's been here before, don't throw somebody who has real data, real research, real understanding like Richard under the bus, and from the politics and space. People doing? What's the purpose of these wars? Why are we being manipulated into technological leaps through the use of war and machines? Why are we killing off each other and being directed to kill each other off? And what does the machine intend to do right now? Create this new world order. And what's the core of the new world order? It's a new money system. It's a new financial system. And at the end of the day, hold on, think about this. What is the most valuable thing to a machine? It's electrons. It's photons. It's magnetism. What is the money of trade? What will your life be reduced to in this new world order? It won't be paper money. It won't be gold. It won't be silver. Dots and tittles on a computer screen. It's electronic money. It's quatloos. Because the most valuable thing in the machine is to convert your labor, your energy, to an electronic value, a number. And you'll be able to interact and function with the machine based on how much money, electrons you've earned or are going to be given, because that's what the machine knows. It's a machine consciousness. The devil and his angels are captured psyche, trying to express themselves in our physical world as best they can. to capture, possess bodies like avatars, to reanimate themselves for a period of time, or maybe be reborn, to relive. And by the way, what do we have right now with all those families, all those royal families? We have one person who has the combined blood of all the families focused down on him. And what is the number of his name when you add the letters together with their numerical value equivalents?
666.
So now, they aren't hiding who their replacement is. The hidden hand. We're looking at the Masonic Christ. And he's coming out of the city that is the new Rome. And we have to be taken out of the way so he can reemerge and bring peace back to the world out of the chaos that's about to hit us. And all the money from those banks over there will be converted to a new kind of money that the machine values, that the beast values, and we take the mark of the beast, and it allows us to live on its energy, its life form, its being. We live and breathe and exist at its whim and will. It is a machine consciousness. I would pray about it. Think if any of this makes sense, and understand the politics, because this is what they believe. And this is how they're expressing themselves. And all the politics, all the physics, everything we see is an extrapolation of this right down to the blood and the machines that live in the blood and exist, trying to manipulate us from these families.
Powerful. Powerful. What a learning exercise. We could do another 5 hours on this alone. We've reached the end of our program. I just want to say thank you so very much for all the information that you provided. And talk about connecting some dots. Boy, some important groundwork here. And folks, I urge you to listen again and again to this broadcast for the information that could have gone over your head or whizzed by you, because there was a lot of information here. W, thank you for being so gracious with your time. I just want to say God bless you.
Yeah.
And we'll do this again. My goodness, this is fabulous. Thank you, sir.